understand how this process has worked in the past. On July 6, 2010, the board required studies of PG&E in order to complete the CEQA process for that amendment. PG&E then signed an MOU with the State Water Board in order to complete the studies and do that analysis. Nowhere during this process did PG&E raise an issue as to whether the board had the authority to do this. In this particular case, my organization happens to disagree with this particular amendment. And unfortunately, the idea that we would somehow kick this to the federal agencies to allow this to be in their venue and under their purview to make this amendment, we would find that completely unacceptable, because in this case, both FERC and the Fish and Wildlife Service, the two federal agencies that have jurisdiction, have refused to meet with us to even discuss this amendment. Fortunately, the State Board and Fish and Game, both state agencies, have been willing to sit down and talk to us about it. So maintaining the board's authority is the only way for us that we can really ensure that we are able to achieve the benefits that we spent so long negotiating on these 30 to 50-year licenses. Apparently, based upon PG&E's letter for reconsideration, the board's authority should only exist if they happen to agree with the amendment. We feel that this is completely incorrect. I strongly urge the board to not allow PG&E or any other utility to pick and choose when you have regulatory oversight over their projects. It's clear to us that the pathway forward to reaching an acceptable solution here is to find a clear and transparent process by which the 401 can be amended that we can all participate in and support. For the details of how to do that, I will hand you off to my esteemed colleague, Richard Bruce Collins. Thank you.
Chair Marcus, Vice Chair Spivey Weber, members, let me begin by saying that I support your vision of this agency as a place for fun and even dancing, and I stipulate that if you act on that vision, I will print and bring to the board T-shirts with Water Code Section 13247 in bright gold letters per our discussion on April 9th. I'm here on behalf of the conservation groups to support your adoption of the proposed order. Let me begin with policy. This certification is good policy to deal with changes in the physical and social environments over the course of the 30 to 50 years that this license will be in effect. This certification calls for adaptive management. In water quality speak, it's reopener or reserved authority, but in scientific terms, it's adaptive management, so that you can, over time, assure that this project continues to achieve all beneficial uses, including the beneficial use of power generation. To turn that on its head, as you were suggesting, Chair Marcus, the board could adopt a certification in 2013 that anticipated all scenarios through 2043 or even 2063. If you did, you would certainly get it wrong. You would either be underprotective or overprotective, but you would not be able to actually foresee the future. You could do it, but it's not smart policy. And it reminds me of a quotation of Mark Twain, not the familiar one that you hear at every board meeting, but instead a different one where he said, you know, it's not the things that you know for sure that ain't so that get you in trouble. It's the things that you don't know that you don't know. Your reserved authority or reopener, whatever the term, is part of your dealing with what you don't know and indeed can't know in 2013. Now let me turn to legal authority. You might get the impression from the briefs that PG&E believes that your authority as exercised in this certification conflicts with the Federal Power Act. And more specifically, you might get the impression that the Federal Power Act results in a license which is almost a contract between the Commission and the licensee. If so, that impression is incorrect. Since 1953, the Commission has included what is now known as Standard Article 15 in every license for major projects, and it has another standard article that applies to all other projects as well, that says that FERC may reopen the license in order to protect the public interest. Since at least 1953, the predecessor to FERC, and now FERC, has recognized that reopener is necessary to protect the public interest under the Federal Power Act itself. Now, the Clean Water Act goes a bit further. Section 303C1 requires this state, like every state, to take a look-see at your water quality standards every 3 years. There's no counterpart in the Federal Power Act. Indeed, there's no word in the Federal Power Act that says reopener, but they implied it. Clean Water Act expressly requires you to take a look-see every 3 years. NIPD's permits under Section 402, of course, have a term, well, Mr. Lawfer, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's every 5 years. Now, while Section 401A1 does not expressly include the term reopener, it's entirely consistent with Section 303C1 to understand that a certification, like other permits under this statute, may over time be adjusted as the Water Quality Control Plan itself is adjusted. Now, to pick up Mr. Steindorf's discussion of the bolt of lightning decision by this board to apply some new requirement in the future, let me just remind you of something that I think you know better than I anyway, which is that your Water Quality Control Plan is a legislative decision. It's not an adjudicatory decision. It is not self-implementing against PG&E or any other entity within the four corners of that region. If you decide to apply a requirement of that plan to PG&E, it becomes applicable only when you undertake the appropriate adjudicatory proceeding to apply it. And if PG&E objects at that time to the application, PG&E has a remedy, as does any other party, which is to challenge your decision through a petition for reconsideration, and if that isn't satisfactory, to go to court. And your application must be supported by substantial evidence and, of course, must be rational as an application of legal requirements. On the topic of authority, let me turn lastly to the Endangered Species Act. Plainly, this board does not delegate or assign any authority to NIMS and Fish and Wildlife Service, no matter how much you cooperate with them. And plainly, if you did, those agencies would not be authorized to consider public trust or any other aspect of water quality other than what's necessary to protect listed species. And so, plainly, the remedy for, or the approach for coordinating state water boards' responsibilities under the Clean Water Act and the ESA is exactly what you discussed with your council, namely coordinated consultation. And there's precedent for that in a certification which this board issued in 2010, or perhaps it's 2011, I'm losing track of time, the Oroville facilities certification, where this board, including two of the sitting members, approved an arrangement under the Habitat Expansion Agreement where the board will affirmatively cooperate with NIMS and Fish and Wildlife Service and other regulatory agencies as that agreement is implemented over the course of the next 30 to 50 years. Smart policy there, smart policy here. Let me end by talking briefly about the gorilla in the room, which is the possibility of litigation. The leading case regarding your authority as applied to a hydropower license, Jefferson County Public Utilities District from 1994, includes a sentence that says there may be a certification sometime that conflicts in some way with the purposes of the Federal Power Act, and we'll deal with that when it arises. Now, I don't think PG&E is going to litigate your decision here, whatever it is, but if they do, or if the next licensee who disputes your general conditions does, let me just say that the Hydropower Reform Coalition, which includes many of the conservation groups I represent today, will stand with you. We've stood before with states, including California, in cases in 2 U.S. courts of appeal. We've appeared twice before the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll be with you. But I will say, I think that would be a wasted effort on our collective part, given that the reserved authority which you are attempting to exercise here is so plainly inherent in the Clean Water Act. And for that reason, I hope that we can find a way here, as well as in subsequent proceedings with PG&E, to do what we have done so often with PG&E, which is to reach settlements. We've reached settlements on relicensings since 2001. We reached a settlement on the bankruptcy reorganization in 2003. I am hopeful, although not certain, that we could reach an understanding that could toll any claims that PG&E may have with respect to the general conditions. But to be very clear with you, the only tolling agreement we're willing to negotiate would be limited to the general conditions, which I believe start at number 15. Any special conditions that are in effect unique to this project need to be resolved in the course of this board's action on the proposed order. Thank you very much for your consideration.
All right. Question? Okay. I'm looking forward to the T-shirt myself. Matthew Fogelson with PG&E said if needed, but anyone? And then I have, just so you know, one more after that. I have Jeffrey McLean from NIMS.
I'll
cede my time to Mr. Toma.
I'll be very brief. Just a couple of responses. Chris Schutz noted that it's not terribly likely that we'll have anadromous fish in this reach, and so all the more reason why we should try to get this argument, this debate to go away and not spend our energies on it. Regarding the forum for working out problems collaboratively, I am involved in the discussions that Chris is referring to, and I believe he mischaracterizes them. PG&E is not going away from ecological resource councils or ERCs or groups like that. In particular on Drum Spalding, we're having a debate on just how to characterize, empower and structure that group. We agree. ERCs have been a good forum for problem solving collaboratively in a less formal setting, and we're trying to figure out how to make that work on Drum Spalding and other proceedings. But we're not yet in agreement on the language to structure that. And then in terms of Dave Steindorf's comments about Pit 1, where PG&E requested that the board change the water quality certification, how I see that as different is the federal process allows for a collaborative solution, and that to me is different from a unilateral change made by the board. So where we and the board were going together to FERC to say we think this change should be made, that to me is a different situation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, Matt?
Mr. McLean?
Or did you want anything else?
Oh, you ceded your time, but didn't say everything you thought he would say,
He
huh?
used it all. I thought he was going to use
He
it all.
didn't even offer us a T-shirt with a lightning bolt on it.
That was an oversight. I actually just want to make one point.
Sure,
I'll try and do it in
that's
about 30 seconds.
Sure.
This idea that, or the suggestion that PG&E is sort of putting its head in the sand and not wanting to consider adaptive management, you know, that's somehow our position. That's not accurate. Just to be clear, we understand the need to evaluate the projects on an ongoing basis. Our contention is that that's best done in the federal forum at FERC. And the reason for that is for the reasons that we've set out in our brief, which I hope everyone looked at. Once the certification is issued and incorporated into the license, it becomes, you know, it's a federal permit, it's a federal license. And the approach for tweaking it at that point is through the FERC process. And that standard Article 15, which Mr. Roos-Collins referred to, we recognize that there, we support that, and that has been exercised in the past, and there's a process for it. And we think that's the appropriate process, instead of allowing the State Water Board, every other agency that participated in the process from the beginning, to kind of re-enter, re-engage for their specific issues. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Understood. Thank you. Mr. McLean? I know it said available as needed, but you've been listening, you may.
Sure. Good afternoon. I'll be quick. My name's Jeff McLean, and I'm from the National Marine Fisheries Service, Protected Resources Division here in Sacramento. I'm the assistant supervisor. And I thought I would spend a little time talking about the Fish Passage RPA that has been the subject of so much conversation, and give you an update on what's going on with that. As you know, the 2009 Water Operations Opinion that the National Marine Fisheries Service issued had a book of RPAs And this is my trusty book here all marked up. And it has been
But
heavily
I
litigated.
just want to see if that's
Yeah.
longer than the TERPA plan, or the 208 plan. It's bigger than the 208 plan, just for the record, yeah. Okay.
And the court, in the most recent decision by the court, remanded the opinion without vacature, meaning that all these RPAs are still enforced and we are still implementing the RPAs. However, there were a select number that were remanded for more work. And so we're heavily involved in doing more work with a lot of the agencies to follow up on those items. The fish passage element in here was not remanded, and we have been working on that since 2009. I'm the co-chair of the Fish Passage Steering Committee. That we've basically been lining up money to get going on our fish passage. We recently just awarded a contract, actually the Reclamation awarded a contract to a consulting firm to address our pilot plan for passage at Shasta. So we're starting this month, and you'll see a lot more activity in that. So we are working on it, and I think that your change sheets are very appropriate. The language in the change sheets are very appropriate and well-researched, and we support those. Questions?
Questions?
Okay.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you, Mr. McLean. Anybody else who hasn't filled out a card? Any comments? Questions?
I think it's interesting when the boilerplate is looked at real closely. Maybe not for folks in the audience, but, you know, let's take a look at that boilerplate again. Make sure that we're comfortable with it. No, thank you very much.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I assume that's a motion for adoption with all the change sheets.
With 3 changes.
No,
With-
2.
Two?
I thought there were 3. Oh, there are two change sheets, okay.
I will second.
All right. Anyone want to say it? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstention? All right, item carries. Thank you all for your time. That was a good discussion. Appreciate it by all the parties concerned. Okay. Ms. Turgovich, item number 9. We can allow Mr. Howard back into the hall, but we don't need him because you are
He
here.
should be returning.
And there he
Item
is.
number 9
Yes.
is an informational item. It's a presentation on the background and status of the Delta Regional Monitoring Program. And I believe Ken Landau, Assistant Executive Officer for Region 5, will lead off or introduce others.
Look at that coordination in action. It's like poetry or a rugby scrum. I don't know which.
Ken Landau, Assistant Executive Officer with the Board. Actually, I'd like to introduce Megan Sullivan, staff person who's been working on the Regional Monitoring Program, and she'll make the main presentation, then introduce the rest of our panel.
Terrific. Thank you. And thanks. Some of you filled out cards, but we're good.
Good morning, Chair and members of the board. My name is Megan Sullivan, and I currently work in the Basin Planning section of the Central Valley Regional Board office. I'm, as Ken mentioned, the lead staff working on the development of the Delta RMP process. I actually gave an update to the regional board on February 1st, which board member Dodek was present for, and it's on her suggestion that I am here today to present to you guys an update. It's sort of the same presentation, but we've had a lot of work that we've done since February 1st, so it's been updated to include all of that. I need that. Thank you. So, today's agenda, first I'll go into a little bit of the background that helps understand the need for and the reason why we've gone on this process to develop a Delta Regional Monitoring Program. Then I'll talk about what's been done as part of the early development process and go on to discuss some of our more recent activities, the what we're doing and where we're going part. As you can see, there's several other members up here with me to help give their perspective on some of the process as well, and we'll introduce them a little bit later. Oh, wrong way. So with that, first, some background, because it really helps understand why we've initiated this process and the importance of having a regional monitoring program for water quality issues in the Delta. So in the early 2000s, this is kind of old news by now, but several species dramatically decreased in abundance, and it's more widely referred to as the pelagic organism decline, or the POD. But what happened after, and with the subsequent inability to really determine the role that contaminants played and or the roles that other stressors played in this decline, sparked a whole lot more interest in regional studies. There have been various panels and commissions that have all been dedicated to the health of the Delta that were formed to review programs and activities, and all of them recognize the need for a program to regularly gather, compile, assess, and report monitoring in the Delta. For our part, the water boards developed a coordinated strategic plan for activities and priorities to be undertaken in the Bay Delta region by the State Water Board, the San Francisco Bay Water Board, and the Central Valley Water Board. The work plan acknowledged the variety of agencies and programs monitoring within the Delta, but also understood that there was no comprehensive contaminants monitoring occurring, and gave the lead charge to developing a regional monitoring program to the Central Valley Water Board. There's general consensus that we could all be doing a better job of actually compiling the data that has been and is being collected from a variety of agencies and programs into more useful assessments that are available to a wide range of interest and to help inform our policy decisions. The current status quo for the regional board doesn't compile all of the information that we're collecting from all of our individual permits into a regional view. The Delta RMP will challenge us all to think differently about the information we're collecting and how it relates to policy decisions. As a result, the program we're developing has the mission to inform decisions on how to protect and, where necessary, restore beneficial uses of water in the Delta by producing objective and cost-effective scientific information critical to understanding regional water quality conditions and trends. This mission statement, I should note, has been developed and vetted by the Delta RMP Steering Committee, which I'll get to in a second. But for the water boards, this mission means that assessing and changing current monitoring requirements can help improve the efficiency while also increasing our regional understanding. By producing regular, timely syntheses and assessments of water quality information, we can make changes to a variety of our regulations and policies, including our basin plans, TMDLs, permits, monitoring and reporting programs, as well as waste discharge requirements. And the hope is that as the program continues to develop and evolve, these regular assessments will help to better assess the quality of our waters by being able to regularly adapt our required monitoring based on the findings in order to maintain the efficient and effective monitoring. So that's the history. So now a little bit on what we've been doing since this process started. In the beginning, after the strategic work plan was released, the development process was formally kicked off with a large meeting in September of 2008. A wide variety of agency and program managers were all personally invited via letters, and a broad range of participants actually attended the meeting, which included the majority of local cities, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, various other reclamation districts and water purveyors, the California Department of Water Resources, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the California Department of Pesticide Regulation, among many others. And for the most part, participation over the length of the process has remained fairly consistent. The participants of this meeting all agreed very broadly on the diagnosis of the problem and the opportunities that were present. Stakeholders also agreed that developing the program in phases would be more likely to lead to a successful implementation. And the initial stage of the development was intended to build some interest, involvement, and momentum by producing some tangible products, which I'll talk about shortly. Subsequent phases would work towards the initial implementation of a monitoring program and then subsequently work towards the establishment of a long-term program that would strive for integration across the different agencies and entities and would regularly adapt, because that's the key term nowadays. So since that first kickoff meeting, there have been numerous stakeholder meetings and a variety of tangible products produced, primarily under the direction of regional board staff with the assistance from the Aquatic Science Center, in order to inform the stakeholders and the public and help move the development process forward. In order to better inform stakeholders, we produced a lot of documents, two of which are pictured on the screen here. The map on the left of the slide actually depicts all of the MPDS monitoring occurring in the Delta, and this was developed as part of the Summary of Water Quality Monitoring, which was developed in tandem with the Central Valley Monitoring Directory. The summary is crucial to identifying all the parties with monitoring efforts and data currently being collected in the Delta. And as we move towards technical design of the initial monitoring framework, the summary will help establish some of the areas of overlap and the areas for increased coordination of monitoring. The image on the right is the cover of the contaminant synthesis report. And this was one of the initial attempts to compile, assess, and summarize data in an attempt to answer a specific regional question. In this case, did contaminants play a role in the pelagic organism decline? Unfortunately, due to a lot of different data systems and the inability to actually compare a lot of the historic data, the authors were actually unable to really draw a conclusion as to the role that contaminants played in the pod. And it's yet another example of why we're undertaking this effort to help make data more regularly available and comparable between the different varieties and programs. Perhaps the most visible products to date are the Pulse of the Delta documents. In March of 2011, we released the first Pulse of the Delta online, and the hard copy version followed in June. The document was widely distributed, received a substantial amount of praise, and garnered more attention for the developing program. The first version focused on topics chosen by regional board staff: pyrethroid pesticides, ammonia, and contaminants of emerging concern. The second edition was planned with stakeholder input and included a status and trends section at their direction, especially for key areas of concern like nutrients and pesticides. The 2012 Pulse of the Delta was released in October of last year, and in addition to the new status and trends section, it contained feature articles related to methylmercury and the Interagency Ecological Program, or the IEP. The Pulse represents the type of product the Delta RMP can use to disseminate summarized information to a much broader audience. The first editions have been based on existing monitoring programs and the results from researchers, but in the future, the Pulse would be just one method of relaying information and results from the program. So more recently, we've actually worked to establish a governance structure to develop the program in a more comprehensive manner. At a broad stakeholder meeting in August of 2012, which was held in response to a draft framework that staff had produced, stakeholders suggested that we take a step back and form this governance structure to really work through all of the questions and issues together in this process. And so as a result, an initial 10-seat steering committee was established, which was recently expanded to an 11-seat steering committee. And it's composed of 3 publicly owned treatment work seats, 2 stormwater seats, one for the phase 1s, one for the phase 2s, the water suppliers, the regulatory, state and federal, each have a seat, coordinated monitoring, which is currently held by the coordinator for IEP, the agricultural interest, and then the resource agencies was the newest seat to be added, which has not yet been filled, but the seat is there. The steering committee has been meeting monthly since last October, and during that time, it's been successful at establishing many initial governing aspects, which included the aforementioned mission statement. They've also established roles and responsibilities for the steering committee and for the future technical committee. Overall, the steering committee has agreed to operate fairly informally and accept input and comments from everyone in attendance at the meeting. The meetings are open to the public and notified via our website and a large LIRIS list, email list. The steering committee has also established a set of broad management questions. The questions are focused on the areas like status and trends, so sources and loadings, forecasting, and effectiveness tracking. And these broad questions will guide the development of the program and help to make sure the information collected actually answers these broad questions and helps guide management and policy decisions for various agencies and organizations. So in the process of working through and developing all these products, the steering committee has been very successful at increasing the dialogue amongst all the participants. So we continue to meet regularly and are working on several more tasks. In fact, we met just last Tuesday, and we're scheduled to meet again on June 4th. We're working to finalize a set of overall guiding principles for the program, which would kind of package some of the elements we have already developed, like the mission statement and the roles and responsibilities, and add them with goals and objectives and basic methods of operations to really help provide the overall strategy for the Delta RMP to operate within. The steering committee is also working to select specific monitoring priorities for the program's initial focus. Current discussions are centered around nutrients, pathogens, mercury, toxicity, and pesticides. The steering committee will direct a technical advisory committee, and 2 co-chairs to lead and develop this committee will be selected at our next committee meeting to summarize information about the various constituents and ultimately to develop a scientifically robust monitoring framework for the initial target. Additionally, regional board staff, in coordination with the future technical team and members of the steering committee, will be working to review monitoring requirements for receiving waters within our existing permits in order to better coordinate the requirements and increase the efficiency and redirect existing monitoring budgets into the RMP. So those are some of the more immediate tasks we're working on, but ultimately all of this is leading us to develop an implementable, probably not the right word, monitoring and assessment program. So over the coming months, the steering committee and the technical advisory committee have many tasks ahead of them to get up and running. The technical advisory committee will have the task of actually developing a monitoring framework that will answer specific questions of interest based on the monitoring priorities that have been chosen by the steering committee that are of interest to a wide variety of stakeholders. The steering committee will be tasked with identifying the best way to actually pay for that monitoring design through a realignment of existing monitoring from permitted dischargers and through coordination with other monitoring programs, such as the environmental monitoring program through the Department of Water Resources and the other IEP-related monitoring programs, and potentially other sources. And the regional board staff will need to recommend specific changes to existing permits that will allow for the flexibility to participate in the proposed monitoring program. Ultimately, the RMP will be implementing a monitoring program, and the information provided from the monitoring will be regularly compiled, assessed, and reported. The Delta RMP will be developing the process through which this happens, but the intent is to coordinate with a broad range of other programs to disseminate and combine information in order to improve models and theories, and ultimately to improve the health and management of the overall Delta ecosystem. The RMP will be looking to work in coordination with the Delta Stewardship Council and the Delta Science Program and Science Plan as that is developed. The Interagency Ecological Program, as I mentioned, they are represented on the steering committee. And the Water Quality Monitoring Council representatives that participate in the Delta RMP effort also participate in the estuaries work group portal, so information will be able to be provided in that manner as well. And additionally, it's our hope to coordinate with the other regional monitoring programs around the inputs and the exits from the Delta. It's a connected system, so there's a lot of other resources available around. And as I mentioned earlier, developing and implementing the Delta RMP, it is a challenge, and it requires thinking about a lot of our existing programs in a different way. It's been done before in other areas of the state, and we're using those other programs as a model and as lessons, but it's still a challenge because there are unique issues in the Delta, and it's new to us, and the time frames of which development has occurred with other ones, there are different challenges now than there were then. But in the long run, you know, this process is going to require some give and take and make some people uncomfortable, and I think that's probably means we're doing it right so far. We have some challenges and some learning curves, but we're developing the relationships and the trust, which will hopefully in the long run improve the overall state of knowledge. So there's a lot of ways to learn more and stay involved. Obviously, we have a website and an email list, and those are long links, so you can always just contact me to get the latest information or be put on the email list. But that concludes my presentation, but as I mentioned, we have these other panel members here, including a representative from the Delta Stewardship Council Delta Science Program and several members of the steering committee. So first, I'm going to let Reiner speak on behalf of the Delta Stewardship Council, and then we'll move along the line through the rest of our steering committee members, and I will let them introduce themselves.
Thank you, Megan. Madam Chair, members of the board, my name is Reiner Honicke. I'm the Deputy EO for Science at the Delta Stewardship Council with quite a bit of institutional background and memory that I'm bringing to this process as a former director at SFEI in the Aquatic Science Center, and before that in Santa Monica Bay. So first, let me commend Region 5 staff and the steering committee members that are sitting, some of whom are sitting before you, for truly, for the immense progress that they've made in just a lot, since I've tracked this since the very beginning. The steering committee is close to a breakthrough and getting this program underway with people in the field and actually moving forward with data collection. So I think the anticipated or the encouraged target date that is spelled out in the Delta Plan for 2014 is a distinct possibility that by then the program will be off and running. So I just wanted to commend everybody involved in working together, and as Megan said, sometimes it takes a while for stakeholder processes to truly take hold. I think the Delta RMP will fill an important gap in science-based management of several key stressors. All signs point toward the Delta RMP becoming a part of collaborative science, where shared purpose, shared resources, and shared results become part of science-based decision-making. This is one of the main premises behind the forthcoming Delta Science Plan, which we're actually fast-tracking so it can truly dovetail shortly thereafter, after the release of the Delta Plan, with the Delta Plan, and I think the timing is right to get that thing out the door and hopefully approved by the Delta Stewardship Council in July. A draft will be out and shared with everyone here in mid-June. So I think the Delta RMP feeds right into all of these efforts of a common science knowledge base that everyone can use, and where we can get away from you know, my science versus your science. And I think we're definitely on the right path toward that collaborative approach. Also, those of you that had a chance to look at the recently published report on integrated management of Delta stressors by the Public Policy Institute, those of you may be aware of the recommendation for a collaborative science model, to look to the collaborative science models in Southern California and the Bay Area. And I'm encouraged by the fact that through state board funding, the Aquatic Science Center as a joint powers authority governed by regulators, permittees, scientists, and environmental interest groups is assisting with know-how and in monitoring program development. And I think it bodes well for independent science and getting everybody to work together on this. The Delta RMP has now arrived at a point where stakeholders have applied the guidance by the Water Quality Monitoring Council and the State Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Strategy to choose a meaningful monitoring design, and it's encouraging to see how regional board staff and the dischargers are striving for efficiency and applying the adaptive management principles outlined in the Delta Plan. And I think the Delta RMP is definitely on track to identify whether the cumulative actions and investments of individual permittees are paying off and becoming visible in key indicators of ecosystem health improvement. Thank you.
I guess we're going down the line then. My name's Dave Tamayo. I'm an environmental specialist with Sacramento County. I'm here today representing the Sacramento Stormwater Quality Partnership, which is the county and the cities of Citrus Heights, Elk Grove, Folsom, Galt, Rancho Cordova, and Sacramento. So we're all a phase one group. We're under one permit, and we act collaboratively to do monitoring of our discharges and of our receiving waters. And one of the things that attracts us to this and that we're encouraged with is that we believe that the RMP has potential to develop a body of scientific knowledge that will help to, you know, solve or even identify some of the problems that are in the Delta. I think it's really important that we reach a better understanding of what the contaminants really are contributing, how they're contributing to impairment of beneficial uses. I think that there's little inklings of information about contaminants and isolated studies here and there, and some pretty big studies, but I don't think that there's a clear understanding of how those contaminants are really happening, and I think that's worked to our disadvantage, and we've seen some evidence of that. There was the US EPA was looking at some of the scattered information of evidence that contaminants were causing a problem. And they were contemplating, well, what do we do to crank down on the NPDES permits? What can we do to make these dischargers solve this problem? It's like, well, wait a second, you know, we don't even know exactly what contaminants are really causing the problem. So I think that we like the idea of the RMP in its focus on trying to identify what's really going on. I think also we see it as potentially a more efficient use of the rather large body of resources that are expended on monitoring in the Delta. And you saw a lot of dots up there. They're not really cohesive. It's not really designed in a way that can answer those questions. So we're looking forward to benefiting from more efficient uses, and then once again focusing on being able to focus what's the real problem. Maybe it'll be something that we're responsible for partly, or maybe it's somebody else, or maybe it's not, you know, it's beyond just controlling the contaminants. I have to say, though, that the other thing that brought us to the table is that we're very uncomfortable with the potential of this being yet another burden on local agencies. And if it's not designed correctly, we see that we don't want this to be just an add-on to all the stuff that we're already doing. We spend, just in Sacramento, under our permit, we spend generally between $600,000 and $1 million a year just on our monitoring. And then we have a much larger budget for all of the other things that we're doing, some of which we don't really believe are necessarily focused on solving water quality problems. They're just, it seems like a good idea, so let's do that. And if we have better information and we're able to do that, we can forestall spending money unnecessarily. But we're really interested in this if it can help us reduce the amount, and there's a big focus on monitoring, but I think some of our other program requirements. But we believe that a lot of our monitoring really doesn't add to this question. And I think that other speakers will probably speak to the concept of cost neutrality for this. And I know that you can't exactly balance, okay, if we take this off, then you get to spend this. But we would like there to be some sort of mechanism or recognition And we've gotten lots of nods from our regulators in the steering committee discussions that, yes, we will be flexible in how NPDES permits are written. Hopefully taking some of the less useful monitoring requirements out of our NPDES permit, and which would not necessarily just trading, but if we don't do that, we just simply wouldn't have the resources to be able to contribute to something that we think would be more useful, a better use of public dollars. And I think a lot of the other stakeholders would probably agree with that. And then finally, I think we need to have both the regional board support and state water board support in looking for other types of funding for this. Certainly there's opportunities to structure some of the state grants around this. I think that there's actually not enough discussion about how are some of the other state monies that support a lot of monitoring in here, how some of those could be realigned or phased into supporting this type of monitoring. And then also involving, having a much stronger involvement from agencies such as DPR, because it's likely, we haven't made a final decision, it's likely we're going to be taking a look at least at some of the pesticides. And there's been some discussion, it's not like they're completely unaware, but I think that they're a key player in this. And then finally, even thinking to, you know, if it does turn out to be certain types of contaminants, even some of the looking at how can we get, say, like the registrants of the pesticides to be supporting some of the surveillance monitoring that would be necessary to determine, well, what's going on with some of these pollutants, and putting some of the responsibility for identifying and solving those problems on some of the ultimate sources for it. But thank you very much for this opportunity.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Wakeman. I represent San Joaquin County and Delta Water Quality Coalition, which is basically the ag coalition that represents the farmers in San Joaquin County, parts of Contra Costa, and a little bit in Calaveras. There are actually two coalitions that encompass the Delta that the RMP is looking at. The other coalition is Sacramento Valley Ag Coalition. I represent the ag groups on the steering committee. Of course, as you know, we are responsible for compliance with the Irrigated Lands Program through the Regional Water Quality Control Board in the Central Valley. I guess you can say I'm the skeptic on the panel. You know, you always got to have the skeptic up here about a new program that government says is going to be bigger and better. And I guess the reason I want to sort of touch on that a little bit is because currently you got to understand how we monitor in the Delta for the ag. We do not monitor in channel, and I don't know if you guys know that. We actually, in the Delta, do not monitor in the channels that a lot of the other people do. We actually monitor in the interior of the islands, in the canals and the islands before the water actually leaves the islands and goes into the main water bodies in the Delta area. So, and you know, we've had discussion with the regional board on this. Is one of the things is how do we transfer some of that monitoring into the other monitoring we're going to end up be doing under the regional monitoring program. And as was being mentioned, is cost neutrality is a huge thing for agriculture. We are in the process right now of developing new WDRs for agriculture in the Central Valley, and all the different coalitions have their own individual WDRs that are coming forward. Groundwater is being added on to our WDRs, and we are going to have to deal with groundwater monitoring and stuff, which is going to be a huge increase in cost for us. So when it comes to developing a new program such as the RMP, we say, yeah, we're interested in it, but again, if it's something that's just going to add cost to us and not provide a benefit for our agriculture and meeting our current requirements or upcoming requirements in the WDR, we have a really hard time selling that to our members. Oh, we just need to be part of this because we think it's a great program. I do see that there might be some benefits down the road. upcoming TMDLs such as methylmercury and those type of things where we got to be monitoring. Maybe in the channel more, we're going to have additional monitoring. Some of the other TMDLs coming down the road where we might be able to benefit from a regional monitoring program. So I think there is maybe some benefits, but we also have to see how that plays out down the road. Another concern is that we're always skeptical in agriculture, as you guys have known. You know, it seems like we're always the naysayers when it comes up to in front of the board. But we're all also a large land mass in the Delta. And it seems like from every side we get hits from one thing or another. We hope that the regional monitoring program and being on the steering committee gives us the ability to collaborate with other entities that are regulated communities. And we think we are in the process of doing that. I think it has opened a dialogue. But again, when it comes to agriculture, it comes to cost. And if it's going to increase our cost, there is going to be huge resistance to it. And that, I mean, that's what it basically comes down to, because any cost that we incur on a coalition level automatically gets passed down to the growers. Currently, you know, our fees are about $2.50 an acre for a grower. They're talking anywhere jumping to $10 to $15 an acre when it comes to adding the groundwater monitoring thing to it. And then if you add another, when you start talking $10 to $15 an acre, that is a significant increase in cost for a grower. So costs are huge, and I can't emphasize, you know, I've said it about 4 or 5 times now, but it is a big thing within that we deal with on the local level. Farmers want to be compliant. They want to go through and do the right things, of course. And we're looking, the way our program is set up now is very, tells us where we're having the issues. Tells us, you know, we get down very narrow to growers, what's being applied, who is actually applying the certain pesticides, and if we're detecting that pesticides in that water, we're able to actually trace it back to some of the, you know, 4 or 5 growers that might have caused that issue that we're finding in water quality. Encourage BMPs to be handled there. How we translate that into a regional monitoring program, which would be very beneficial to agriculture, is still something we have to work through and work out. I mean, sure, we might find something in the main channel, but the question is where did it actually come from? And what we have now is an ability to be able to, you know, trace back some of that a little bit more easily for us. So. With that, I'll end there and just say thank you for the opportunity. We're going to continue to participate in the program. We think there's some benefits there, but we're also very, very cautious of how it moves forward.
I just have a quick question of Mike. First of all, hello. Good to see you again. What about the south of San Joaquin County? It sounds like you're working with Sacramento and San Joaquin County, but what about the southern counties and their contribution? Are you somehow coordinating with those coalitions?
Well, currently the regional monitor is a Delta Regional Monitoring Program, period. So it's just been our coalition and what's happening within the Delta. So there hasn't been anything really expanded out to any of the coalitions south of the county.
But some of that's coming into the Delta.
What's that? Yeah, it's coming into the Delta. We do coordinate a lot of stuff. I work closely with Perry Kloss and with East San Joaquin down and also the guys on the west side. So there is a lot of coordination between the coalitions. But this regional monitoring program is basically just more focused on the Delta and not south of the Delta. I think Megan has something too.
And if I'll just jump in, there has been explorations about a San Joaquin regional monitoring program. There are challenges with that, as with any, and if and when that does come to develop, we would definitely coordinate and work with them. We understand that you've got 2 significant input points into the Delta, and so we need to know where things are coming from. So, but right now we're focused on the Delta aspect of it.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name's Chair Marcus and board members. My name's Linda Dorn. I'm an environmental program manager with Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District and represent one of the 3 POTW seats on the Delta Regional Monitoring Program Steering Committee. And the first thing that we would like to do is appreciate the regional board staff for their responsiveness to our request for forming a steering committee of stakeholders that have a financial stake in developing a Delta Regional Monitoring Program. You've heard funding throughout, and you're going to hear it again from me. The uniqueness of the Delta requires a unique regional monitoring program, and that includes determining how to fund a regional monitoring program. You've heard cost neutrality mentioned, and that's essential to POTWs providing funding. And there was an early commitment by both the regional and state boards to do this. POTWs have said for years that this effort should not increase their monitoring costs. Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District spends approximately $220,000 a year on ambient water quality monitoring now. And additionally, 21% of the State Water Board's SWAMP program is funded through MPDS permit fees. A successful regional monitoring program will need funding beyond what can be obtained through an offset of permit-specific MPDS ambient water quality monitoring. And therefore, the program will be budget constrained if it's limited to that. So the ability of the program to address water quality concerns that come up will be based on a number of non-regulated stakeholders that will have to participate and provide funding to the process. Thinking the program can be or should be accomplished by POTWs and stormwaters is not appropriate. And we need to have a broad consortium of funding represented by steering committee members. And in switching from funding to one other issue that we have had is there hasn't been a total agreement on what role the RMP will play with the assessment of data. And we believe the focus should be on water quality status and trends, as that's an initial step in answering some of the monitoring questions or the management questions that were, I don't think you got the complete list, but you got the categories. And status and trends is the start. So, and we're glad that we have an agreed upon set of management questions because it's hard to develop a monitoring program without that. And I'm brief normally. So we look forward to making this program successful in any way that we can. And thank you for your time and interest in having us give you some information.
Thank you. It's nice to see all of you in new roles. Oh, Ken, you're going to talk too. rather
One
than
more,
just
yeah.
be the-
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure your microphone's on.
Nobody's come up with any new words yet, and from a science panel I was expecting. Although vacature, is that a real word? It is. That was the best today. Go ahead.
No, I'd like to be reporting we're up and making wonderful new scientific discoveries every day. But every RMP or regional project like this started somewhere and took a while to get going. And often what you're seeing in the San Francisco Bay Regional Monitoring Program or the Southern California BITE programs those started decades ago and have built. And we are at the point
I was in
where-
all those meetings with Reiner decades ago in Southern California.
A few years back.
Yeah.
And it takes a while to get going. And as Reiner said, you know, I think we've kind of hit a critical mass. We've got a lot going. A lot has changed since Ms. Dodak heard this update just back in the beginning of February. And I think we've got a lot of momentum going on that. I'm actually here with two hats on. I'm the Assistant Executive Officer who does the NPDS, Stormwater, Irrigated Lands, and Swamp programs in the office. So I have virtually all of the surface water monitoring in the Delta done by the Regional Board under my jurisdiction. And then I'm also the member on the steering committee for the regulatory agencies. Regional monitoring program has been a high priority for Pamela Creedon ever since she got to the board. And so we have certainly been putting work on it, time in on it, and, but it is a slow process, and it is a stakeholder process. It is not a regional board staff effort solely, although we've certainly done a lot of the technical work, and now Aquatic Science Center is doing a lot of the technical work. But just having it as a regional board program, I don't think will sustain it any more than any of the other regional monitoring programs. So we are taking a lot of time to try to build a solid stakeholder process. I agree with some of the comments. We will need a larger conglomeration of stakeholders in the long run. There are, Caltrans, Corps of Engineers, a lot of other people working in the Delta have not really participated up to this point, but we've got to start someplace.
Are ports folks interested?
They're aware of what we're doing. Again, there's a lot of issues in the Delta, and if we try to take too large of a bite the first time around, we will choke and not succeed. So we're starting with what we see as possible and expand from there, and that includes more people, more issues, more funding from more sources. We're not expecting the NPDS folks to try to monitor and address all issues in the Delta. Many hundreds of millions of dollars haven't answered all those questions yet, so we're not expecting our NPDS folks to pick up all that stuff, or irrigated land or anybody. But we have quite a ways to go, and you've heard some of the issues today. These have involved many hours of discussion at the steering committee meeting. They will continue to be discussed. This is definitely, as with any stakeholder process, 2 steps forward. You think you've moved to solid ground, new issues come up, and you have to take that step back and reconsider where you are. Otherwise, that next step gets very, very iffy. And I think taking the time to build it right from the beginning will help us in the long run. A lot of what the regional board is doing is looking at the monitoring that is currently done under the various programs that we have in the Delta. Certainly the easiest to deal with is the NPDS sewage treatment plants, where we've got monitoring, which we actually have been cutting back on over time, the routine upstream, downstream monitoring as our treatment plants have gone to tertiary treatment and ammonia and nitrogen removal. A lot of the individual impacted packs we see from the treatment plants have been reduced, but there are still problems in the Delta. A lot of the monitoring for NPDS deals with just determining the background conditions at each individual site, so we have the information to write the NPDS permits. I think there is a large part of what I'm looking at is what can we cut out in terms of individual monitoring? How can we combine the data that is currently done by each individual discharger at various locations to look at what can be done collectively, and not just take these same monitoring programs and just put it under a new name, but actually improve it. If you look at the monitoring programs in the San Francisco Bay area of the Region 2, the receiving water monitoring program is about 2 lines long. It says, participate in the regional monitoring program, and words to that effect. Again, it took them a long time to get to that point. A lot of trust had to be built between the dischargers and the regional boards, and we will get there. There are certainly challenges for stormwater and irrigated lands in that they don't do a lot of open water monitoring in the Delta. And we fully recognize that a lot of the Delta water doesn't, and a lot of the wastes in the Delta don't originate from the Delta.
Right.
So we're looking at, how far to expand. Again, if we take on, one of the problems we have in Region 5 is that our watershed, we really have 2. The Tulare Lake Basin, which is huge, bigger than some regions, and then the Sacramento-San Joaquin, which is really 2 rivers predominantly, and you just can't take that big of a bite in any of our TMDLs or this. So where do we start? And we're not drawing a firm line at the Delta legal boundary. We're going to be doing some things in and out of it. When we get to some of the issues like nutrients and stuff, that's not going to be just in the Delta. It's probably going to be looking much broader than that. But I don't want to take the step to that, this week. We've got to build a much stronger foundation and deal with local issues first with local funding, and then build as we expand in what we're doing. So with that, I or anybody else will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And as Mr. Landau mentioned, I did hear this panel presentation at the Regional Water Board meeting in February. I was impressed then, and you are even better the second time around. If I recall correctly, at the Regional Board meeting, it was Board Member Schneider, I think, who raised a concern regarding the lack of environmental representation and the lack of environmental justice representation in this effort. And I can't recall what the response to his concern was, but my question to Mr. Landau, in your comment regarding expanding the stakeholder group, is that a particular area that you would be making outreach efforts to?
Well, we have